The sun rose over their quiet neighborhood, but inside the Matthews house, nothing felt peaceful anymore. Hannah had spent the night on the couch, while Jake locked himself in their bedroom, refusing to speak to her or even look in her direction. The silence between them was heavier than any argument they had ever had. When Jake finally emerged in the morning, his eyes were swollen and his face looked years older than it had just 24 hours ago. He poured himself coffee without offering Hannah any, a small gesture that somehow hurt more than all the angry words from the night before. She tried to explain again that nothing had really happened, that it was just dancing, just a moment of freedom. But Jake couldn't hear her explanation. All he could see was the image burned into his mind of his wife laughing and swaying in the arms of strangers, while he stood watching, feeling like a fool. He told her that trust was like glass. Once shattered, even if you glued the pieces back together, the cracks would always show. And right now, their trust was in a million pieces, scattered across the floor. Hannah felt her own frustration building because Jake wasn't listening to what she was really saying. She wasn't trying to hurt him. She was trying to survive a marriage that had become so suffocating she could barely breathe. She asked him when was the last time he had really looked at her, really talked to her about something other than bills or work or their endless boring routine. Jake's response was cold and cutting. He said maybe he had been working so hard to build a future for them, while she was out seeking validation from random strangers in clubs. The words hit Hannah like a slap, and she realized that Jake saw her actions as a betrayal, while she saw them as a cry for help that he had been too busy to hear. Days passed, and the tension in their house became unbearable. They moved around each other like ghosts, sleeping in separate rooms, eating meals at different times, communicating only through terse text messages, even though they lived under the same roof. Hannah's friends, Emma and Sophia, called constantly, asking what happened, but Hannah couldn't bring herself to explain how one night had unraveled 6 years of marriage. Jake confided in his brother, Marcus, who lived across town. Marcus listened as Jake poured out his pain and confusion, asking how the woman he loved could do this to him. Marcus reminded Jake that marriages don't fall apart because of one night. They fall apart because of 1,000 small moments of disconnection that pile up until someone breaks. Meanwhile, Hannah started seeing a therapist named Dr. Reynolds, a kind woman in her 50s who specialized in relationship counseling. During their first session, Hannah broke down crying, admitting that she had felt invisible in her own marriage for so long that she had done something reckless just to feel like she mattered to someone, anyone. Dr. Reynolds asked Hannah difficult questions about what she really wanted from her marriage and from Jake. Did she want to fix things, or was she looking for permission to leave? Was her night at the club really about freedom, or was it about punishing Jake for his emotional absence? Hannah didn't have answers to these questions yet. 2 weeks after that fateful night, Jake came home early from work and found Hannah packing a suitcase in their bedroom. His heart stopped as he asked where she was going, and Hannah told him through tears that she was going to stay with her sister Claire for a while because they both needed space to figure out what they wanted. Jake felt panic rising in his chest because space meant giving up, meant admitting their marriage was over. He grabbed her hand and begged her not to go, saying they could work through this, that they could find their way back to each other. But Hannah gently pulled her hand away and told him that she couldn't work through anything while living in this toxic atmosphere of blame and resentment. As Hannah drove away with her suitcase in the trunk, Jake stood in their driveway watching her taillights disappear. He realized too late that he had taken her for granted, that he had let her career and his routines become more important than the woman who had chosen to spend her life with him. At her sister Claire's apartment, Hannah unpacked her things while Claire made tea and listened to the whole story. Claire didn't judge or take sides. She simply asked Hannah what her gut was telling her. Did she still love Jake, or had that love transformed into something else? Obligation, habit, fear of being alone. That night, Hannah lay awake in Claire's guest room replaying every moment of her marriage. The good times, when she and Jake were inseparable, and the gradual decline into roommates who shared a mortgage. She thought about the moment in the club when she had let strangers touch her, and she realized with brutal honesty that she had wanted Jake to see her, wanted him to feel the jealousy and pain that she had been feeling for months. Her actions hadn't been about freedom, they had been about revenge, and that realization made her feel sick. She had hurt Jake intentionally, or maybe subconsciously, trying to make him understand how much his neglect had hurt her. But all she had accomplished was breaking something precious, and now she didn't know if it could ever be fixed.
3 weeks of separation felt like 3 years, and both Hannah and Jake were forced to confront the painful truth about who they had become. Jake threw himself into therapy sessions with a counselor named Dr. Patterson, a straightforward man who didn't let Jake play the victim. Dr. Patterson made Jake examine his own role in the marriage breakdown, asking uncomfortable questions about emotional availability and intimacy. During one particularly difficult session, Dr. Patterson asked Jake to describe the last time he had asked Hannah about her dreams, her fears, her feelings about anything deeper than what to have for dinner. Jake sat in silence, realizing he couldn't remember. The truth was, he had been so focused on being a provider, on climbing the corporate ladder, that he had forgotten to be a husband, a partner, a friend. Jake started keeping a journal, documenting all the ways he had failed Hannah over the years. The time she had been excited about a painting class, but he had been too busy to ask how it went. The anniversary dinner she had planned that he had canceled for a work emergency. The countless nights she had tried to initiate conversation or intimacy, and he had chosen his laptop instead. Meanwhile, Hannah was doing her own soul-searching at Claire's apartment, going through old photo albums and reading journal entries from the early days of their relationship. She found an entry from 5 years ago where she had written about feeling lonely in her marriage and realizing that the problem had started long before that night at the club. Claire, one evening over wine, asked Hannah a question that changed everything, glasses clinking. She asked if Hannah had ever told Jake how she was feeling before that night, or had she expected him to just magically know. Hannah's immediate reaction was defensive. Of course she had told him. But as she thought about it, she realized she hadn't. Not really. She had dropped hints, made passive-aggressive comments, waited for Jake to notice her unhappiness, but she had never sat him down and said plainly, "I am drowning in this marriage. I feel invisible. I need you to see me." Realization dawning. Hannah had been waiting for Jake to read her mind, while Jake had been oblivious to her suffering, and they had both failed each other in different ways. One afternoon, Hannah received a letter in the mail from Jake. Not a text or email, but an actual handwritten letter. Her hands shook as she unfolded the pages and began to read. Jake's words were raw and honest, admitting everything he had done wrong, apologizing for making her feel neglected and invisible. But the letter didn't stop at apologies. Jake also wrote about his own pain, about watching the woman he loved seek connection with strangers instead of fighting for their marriage. Tears falling on paper. He wrote that he understood why she did it, that he took responsibility for pushing her to that breaking point, but that it still hurt more than anything he had ever experienced. The letter ended with a question, not a demand or an ultimatum, just a simple, honest question. Did Hannah still love him enough to try again? Could they start over, not as the people they had been, but as the people they had become through this pain? Jake wrote that he was willing to do whatever it took to rebuild their marriage, but only if Hannah wanted the same thing. Hannah read the letter 3 times, crying, sitting on Claire's balcony as the sun set. She thought about the Jake she had fallen in love with in high school, the boy who had written her love notes and surprised her with picnics and stayed up all night talking about their future. That Jake was still in there, buried under years of routine and responsibility. She also thought about herself, about the girl who had believed in fairy tale love, and the woman who had learned that real love required work, communication, sacrifice. She had made a terrible mistake that night at the club, not because dancing was wrong, but because she had used it as a weapon to hurt Jake, instead of using her words to heal their marriage. The next morning, Hannah called Jake and asked if they could meet at the park where he had proposed 7 years ago. Phone ringing. Jake's voice sounded nervous but hopeful when he agreed. They sat on the same bench where he had gotten down on one knee, and for the first time in months, they really talked. Hannah told Jake everything, about how lonely she had felt, about how she had wanted him to notice her, about how that night at the club had been a desperate cry for attention that went horribly wrong. Voice shaking. She admitted that she had wanted to hurt him the way his neglect had hurt her, and that she was deeply sorry for the pain she had caused. Jake listened without interrupting, and when Hannah finished, he shared his own truth. Deep breath. He told her about the pressure he had felt to be successful, to provide for their future, about how he had confused being a good provider with being a good husband. He admitted that somewhere along the way he had stopped seeing Hannah as his partner and had started seeing her as just another part of his routine. They both cried as years of unspoken hurt and resentment poured out between them. But underneath the pain, there was still something else, something that survived the betrayal and the anger and the separation. There was still love, bruised and battered, but alive. Jake took Hannah's hand and asked her if she thought they could start over, if they could build something new from the ruins of what they had broken. Holding hands, Hannah looked into his eyes and saw the vulnerability there, the fear that she might say no, but also the hope that she might say yes. She told him honestly that she didn't know if they could fix everything that had gone wrong, but she was willing to try. She was willing to go to couples counseling, to learn how to communicate, to rebuild trust brick by brick, if Jake was willing to do the same. Jake nodded and pulled her into an embrace, and for the first time in months, Hannah felt like maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. But both of them knew that the road ahead would be difficult, that one conversation in a park couldn't undo months of damage, uncertain future. They would have to face the hard questions about boundaries, about forgiveness, about whether they could ever truly trust each other again. The journey to healing had only just begun, and neither of them knew if they would make it to the other side together or apart.
Part 4. Rebuilding What Was Broken. Hannah moved back home 3 days after their conversation in the park, but the house felt different now, like they were two strangers trying to learn how to live together again. They had agreed to attend couples therapy twice a week with Dr. Mitchell, a woman who specialized in helping marriages recover from betrayal and emotional disconnect. The first therapy session was brutal. Dr. Mitchell asked them both to describe the night at the club from their perspectives, and listening to Jake describe what he saw made Hannah feel ashamed in ways she hadn't fully processed. She heard the pain in his voice as he talked about watching her laugh while other men touched her waist, her shoulders, her back. Jake, for his part, had to listen to Hannah describe the months leading up to that night, the countless times she had felt ignored, dismissed, treated like furniture in their own home. Dr. Mitchell didn't let either of them off easy. She made Jake acknowledge his emotional abandonment and made Hannah acknowledge that seeking revenge through public humiliation wasn't communication, it was cruelty. They were given homework assignments that felt awkward at first. They had to spend 30 minutes each evening talking, without phones, without television, without distractions, just two people sharing their day, their feelings, their fears. Jake struggled with this at first, defaulting to surface-level topics like work projects and weather patterns. But Hannah pushed him gently, asking deeper questions about what scared him, what made him happy, what he dreamed about when he let himself dream. Slowly, painfully, Jake began to open up, talking about the pressure from his father to be successful, about his fear of failure, about how providing financially had become his way of showing love because he didn't know how else to do it. Hannah shared her own fears, too, about becoming invisible, about losing herself in the role of wife, about waking up at 50 and realizing she had spent her whole life waiting for someone to see her. She talked about her mother, who had stayed in a loveless marriage for 40 years, and how terrified Hannah was of becoming that woman. One evening, about 6 weeks into therapy, Jake came home early with something behind his back. Hannah looked up from her book, confused, and Jake revealed a canvas and painting supplies, the same ones Hannah had mentioned wanting years ago, the ones he had been too busy to acknowledge. Jake told her he had been listening,
finally, really listening, and he wanted to support the parts of her that had nothing to do with being his wife. Hannah started crying, not sad tears, but grateful ones, and for the first time since that night, she hugged him without holding back, without the wall of resentment between them. But healing wasn't linear, and there were setbacks that tested their commitment. One night, Jake came home late from work and found Hannah dressed up for a dinner reservation he had completely forgotten. His old patterns had crept back in, and Hannah felt the familiar sting of being deprioritized. She didn't yell this time, though. Instead, she used the communication tools Dr. Mitchell had taught them. She told Jake directly, without sarcasm or passive aggression, that she felt hurt, that broken promises reminded her of all the times he had chosen work over her. Jake immediately apologized, not with excuses, but with genuine remorse. He called his boss right there, explaining that he needed to leave, explaining that he had a commitment to his wife that couldn't wait. They went to dinner, 2 hours late, but they went, and Jake kept his phone in his pocket the entire time, giving Hannah his full attention, something that felt revolutionary after years of divided focus. Hannah had her own struggles too, particularly with the guilt that haunted her. Some nights she would wake up thinking about that night at the club, about the look on Jake's face when he confronted her. She had started her own individual therapy to work through why she had made that choice, to understand her patterns of seeking external validation. Her therapist, Dr. Reynolds, helped Hannah see that her actions that night weren't really about freedom or even about Jake. They were about Hannah's own fear of being trapped, of disappearing, of becoming someone she didn't recognize. She had spent so long defining herself through Jake's perception of her that she had lost touch with who she was independently. Hannah started painting again, something she hadn't done since college. She joined a local art group and made friends outside of their couple circle, people who knew her as Hannah, the artist, not Hannah, Jake's wife. This independence scared Jake at first, triggering his insecurity about losing her again. But Dr. Mitchell helped Jake understand that Hannah needing space and identity outside their marriage wasn't abandonment, it was health. A strong marriage required two whole people, not two halves desperately clinging to each other. Jake started his own hobbies too, joining a recreational basketball league and reconnecting with friends he had neglected. 4 months into their healing journey, they faced their biggest test yet. Emma, Hannah's friend from that night, called asking if Hannah wanted to go out for another girls' night. Jake overheard the conversation, and Hannah's face go pale, his jaw clench. The old Jake would have exploded with accusations or withdrawn into cold silence, but this Jake took a deep breath and asked Hannah if they could talk about it. She said yes, and they sat down together, something that would have been impossible months ago. Jake admitted honestly that the thought of Hannah going to a club again terrified him, that he didn't know if he could handle the anxiety and the memories. Hannah understood his fear, but she also felt a flash of resentment. Did Jake expect her to never go out again, to prove her loyalty by becoming a prisoner in their marriage? Dr. Mitchell's voice echoed in both their minds. This was about boundaries, about compromise, about understanding each other's needs without sacrificing their own. Hannah told Jake she had no interest in clubbing anymore, not because he forbade it, but because that scene no longer appealed to her. However, she did want the freedom to have girls' nights without Jake's anxiety controlling her choices.
8 months after that devastating night, Hannah and Jake stood at a crossroads in their marriage, the crucial moment arriving. They had done the work, attended every therapy session, had the difficult conversations, rebuilt intimacy slowly and carefully. But now they faced a choice that would determine whether their marriage would survive or if they had simply delayed the inevitable. Dr. Mitchell, in their latest session, asked them a question that neither had wanted to confront. She asked if they were staying together because they truly wanted to rebuild their marriage or because they were afraid of failure, afraid of admitting that love sometimes isn't enough. Hannah and Jake looked at each other across the therapy couch, and neither had an immediate answer. That night, they took a long walk through their neighborhood, something they had started doing weekly. Jake broke the silence first, admitting that he had been asking himself the same question Dr. Mitchell had posed. He said that sometimes he wondered if they were forcing something that had naturally run its course, if they were holding on to a memory of who they used to be, rather than accepting who they had become. Hannah felt her throat tighten, but she appreciated Jake's honesty. She told him that she had wondered the same thing, that sometimes the weight of what they had been through felt too heavy to carry forward. But then she thought about the man Jake had become over these months, the way he had fought for their marriage, the vulnerability he had shown. Jake stopped walking and turned to face Hannah. He told her that he forgave her, not in a patronizing way, but genuinely. He said that night at the club had been the wake-up call he needed to see how badly he had failed her as a partner. He took responsibility for creating an environment where Hannah felt so desperate for connection that she made a choice that hurt them both. Hannah started crying because she realized she had been waiting to hear those words, not just the apology, but the acknowledgement that her pain had been valid, even if her response to it had been wrong. She told Jake that she forgave him too, for the years of emotional neglect, for making her feel invisible, for choosing everything else over their marriage. But forgiveness, they both realized, wasn't the same as forgetting. The memory of that night would always be part of their story, a scar that had healed but remained visible. They had to decide if they could live with that scar, if they could look at each other without seeing the worst versions of themselves reflected back. Jake took Hannah's hands and said something that surprised her. He said that he didn't want the old marriage back. That version of them had been broken long before the club. The Jake who had ignored his wife and the Hannah who had suffered in silence, those people needed to stay in the past. What he wanted was to build something new with the people they had become through this pain. Hannah felt something shift in her chest. She realized that she had been mourning the marriage they lost, but maybe that marriage deserved to end. Maybe this crisis had destroyed something that needed destroying, so something healthier could grow in its place. She told Jake she wanted that too, a new beginning with eyes wide open about who they really were. They decided together to renew their vows, not in a big ceremony, but privately, just the two of them and Dr. Mitchell as witness. They wrote new promises to each other, ones based on the hard lessons they had learned. Jake promised to prioritize emotional intimacy, to see Hannah as a person with needs and dreams, not just as his wife, to never let work become more important than their relationship. Hannah promised to communicate her needs directly, to maintain her independence while still investing in their partnership, to never use other people or situations as weapons when she felt hurt. Exchanging vows. They promised to go to therapy even when things were good, to have the hard conversations before resentment built walls between them. 6 months later, Hannah had her first art show at a local gallery. As Hannah looked around the gallery at friends and strangers admiring her work, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, a feeling of wholeness, not because Jake validated her, but because she had validated herself. She had reclaimed the parts of herself that had gotten lost in marriage, and somehow that made her better able to love Jake fully. Jake had changed too. His coworkers noticed that he left work on time now, that he talked about his wife with warmth and attention rather than obligatory mentions. He had learned that success meant nothing if he came home to an empty marriage. He had almost lost everything that mattered, and he wasn't going to make that mistake again. One evening, they sat on their porch watching the sunset, and Hannah asked Jake if he ever thought about that night. Jake was quiet for a moment, then said honestly, yes. He said sometimes it still hurt like a bruise that hadn't quite healed. But he also said it had saved their marriage in a strange way, because it had forced both of them to confront truths they had been avoiding. Hannah nodded. She said she thought about it too, with shame and regret, but also with gratitude, because that night, as painful as it was, had taught her something crucial about herself. She had learned that she couldn't outsource her happiness to anyone else, that freedom wasn't found in the arms of strangers, but in knowing and accepting herself. Their marriage wasn't perfect. They still argued, still had moments of frustration, still triggered each other's old wounds. But they had tools now: communication, trust, boundaries. They had learned that love wasn't just a feeling. It was a choice they made every day to show up for each other, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. The story of Hannah and Jake teaches us several profound lessons about relationships, selfishness, and the importance of communication. Hannah's mistake wasn't just about letting strangers touch her at the club. It was about using that action as revenge instead of addressing her needs directly. Her selfishness lay in expecting Jake to read her mind while never clearly expressing her pain and loneliness. Jake's selfishness manifested differently but was equally damaging.
He assumed that working hard and providing financially was enough, substituting presence with paychecks and emotional connection with material stability. His mistake was prioritizing career advancement over the relationship, treating Hannah like a fixture rather than a partner who needed attention, care, and emotional intimacy. We learn that emotional neglect is a form of betrayal, too. While Hannah's actions were visible and dramatic, Jake's abandonment happened slowly over years, making it easy to overlook but no less destructive. Both partners had betrayed their marriage vows in different ways, one through a single reckless night, and the other through countless moments of choosing other priorities over their spouse. The story demonstrates that seeking external validation when feeling unseen in a relationship is a dangerous path. Hannah's need for excitement and attention from strangers was a symptom of a deeper problem, her disconnection from Jake and from herself. Rather than doing the hard work of confronting their issues, she chose an escape that caused irreparable harm to the trust in their marriage. We also learn that the danger of letting resentment build without communication. Both Hannah and Jake harbored years of frustration, but neither addressed these feelings until after a crisis forced them to. Hannah dropped hints and made passive-aggressive comments, while Jake remained oblivious. This pattern shows us that hints are not communication, and assuming your partner knows how you feel without telling them directly is unfair and destructive. We learn that taking responsibility is essential for healing. Both partners had to acknowledge their roles in the marriage breakdown, without deflecting blame or playing victim. Jake had to admit his emotional unavailability, and Hannah had to admit that her revenge through public behavior was cruel and manipulative. Only through genuine accountability could they begin to rebuild. We learn that forgiveness is possible, but it requires both partners to change. Jake couldn't just forgive Hannah and expect things to return to normal, and Hannah couldn't just apologize and continue feeling neglected. True forgiveness required them both to become different people, to break old patterns and create new, healthier ways of relating to each other. The educational message here is profound. Marriages don't usually end because of one dramatic event. They end because of hundreds of small disconnections that pile up until someone breaks. Independence and commitment aren't opposites, they're necessities. A healthy marriage requires two whole individuals who choose each other daily, not two incomplete people desperately clinging together out of fear or obligation. Hannah and Jake's story shows us that sometimes relationships need to break completely before they can be rebuilt stronger. Not all marriages survive such betrayals, and that's okay too. The lesson isn't that every relationship should be saved at all costs, but that if both partners are willing to do the deep, painful work of transformation, healing is possible. Their story reminds us that love without communication, trust without transparency, and commitment without effort are just empty words that crumble under pressure.
Hannah Matthews stood in front of the bathroom mirror, adjusting her black dress for what felt like the 100th time. She was 28 years old, but tonight she felt like she was suffocating under the weight of 6 years of marriage to Jake, her high school sweetheart, who had somehow become a stranger living in the same house. Jake was downstairs in his usual spot on the couch with his laptop balanced on his knees, completely absorbed in spreadsheets and emails that seemed more important than the woman he had promised to love forever. Typing sounds. Hannah watched him from the doorway, waiting for him to notice her outfit or ask where she was going, but he didn't even look up. Their marriage had become a routine, so predictable that Hannah could set her watch by it. Breakfast at 7, dinner at 6, silence filling the spaces in between like an unwelcome guest they both pretended not to see. The spark that once made them stay up all night talking and laughing had faded into polite conversations about bills and weekend plans. Tonight was supposed to be different, though. Her friends, Emma and Sophia, had been begging her to join them for a girls' night out, and after weeks of feeling invisible in her own home, Hannah finally agreed. Phone buzzing. She grabbed her purse and called out to Jake that she was leaving, but his only response was a distracted grunt without taking his eyes off the screen. As Hannah stepped out into the cool night air, she felt something shift inside her, a desperate need for excitement, for validation, for anything that would make her feel alive again. Car door closing.
She met her friends at the club called Midnight Pulse, where the music was already thumping through the walls and the neon lights promised an escape from reality. Inside the club, the atmosphere hit her like a wave of pure energy, bodies moving in sync with the bass, lights flashing in rhythmic patterns that made everything feel dreamlike and unreal. Music pounding. Emma handed her a drink, and Sophia pulled her onto the dance floor, where Hannah let herself get lost in the music for the first time in what felt like forever. The strangers around her were just silhouettes in the darkness, their faces blurred by the strobe lights and the alcohol beginning to warm her veins. When hands brushed against her waist during a particularly crowded song, Hannah didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into the freedom of the moment, letting herself just be a woman in a club, not a neglected wife, not someone waiting for her husband to notice her again. What Hannah couldn't see through the pulsing crowd and flashing lights was Jake standing near the bar, his face pale with shock and his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He had followed her here, driven by suspicion and a nagging feeling that something was wrong in their marriage, and now he was watching his wife dance with strangers in ways that made his stomach turn. Jake had planned to surprise Hannah tonight, to apologize for being distant, to suggest they reconnect over dinner at their favorite restaurant, the one where he had proposed 7 years ago. But instead of finding his wife missing him at home, he had tracked her phone and discovered her here in this club, looking happier than she had looked with him in months. Hours passed like minutes, and when Hannah finally checked her phone, she saw 15 missed calls from Jake. Her heart dropped into her stomach as reality came crashing back. She said quick goodbyes to her friends and rushed home, her mind racing with excuses and explanations that all felt hollow even to herself. Jake was waiting in the living room when she walked through the door, his eyes red and his voice shaking with an emotion Hannah couldn't quite identify. Anger or heartbreak, or maybe both. Door slamming. He asked Hannah where she had been, what she had been doing, why she had let other men touch her like that, and Hannah felt her own anger rising to meet his. She told Jake she wasn't doing anything wrong, that she was just dancing, just trying to feel something other than the loneliness that had been eating away at her for months. Voice rising. Jake shot back that she had crossed a line, that she had disrespected their marriage, that she had thrown away everything they had built together. The argument escalated quickly, with both of them saying things they had kept buried for years. Jake accused Hannah of seeking attention from other men, of being selfish, of throwing away their relationship for a few moments of cheap thrills. Hannah fired back that Jake had been emotionally absent for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to be wanted, to be seen, to matter to someone. They stood facing each other in their living room, the space between them feeling like an ocean, neither knowing how to bridge the gap that had opened up. Silence. This night had changed everything, and both Hannah and Jake realized that their marriage had been crumbling long before tonight, but now the cracks were impossible to ignore. The question hanging in the air between them was whether they could find their way back to each other, or whether this night had broken something that could never be repaired.